When a humble maid son offers a simple white flower to the millionaire's mother, a buried name stitched to its stem awakens a 30-year lie, a stolen child, a forbidden truth, and a family about to shatter under the weight of the past. Before we continue, subscribe now to our channel to receive everyday powerful stories that touch the heart. In the glass-domed conservatory of the Valmont estate, twilight pooled like melted sapphire across marble floors, and strings trembled in the air. Gardenias leaned over silver vases while murmurs rose and fell around crystal laughter, measured and thin. Daniel moved between tuxedos and diamonds with the quiet economy of someone who has learned to be invisible where eyes are expensive. He carried no tray tonight, only a single white camellia he had coaxed open at dawn, petals still remembering the cool breath of morning. The flower looked fragile in his calloused fingers, an ordinary miracle rescued from the greenhouse's humid hush. Guests pretended not to notice the boy who did not belong in their reflected world, yet they parted grudgingly, resentful at being made to move. A waltz unspooled as he reached the base of the staircase where portraits washed with oil-dark judgment. Above them all, a chandelier sifted light like sugar over a room that constantly measured worth. Helena Valmont, poised in porcelain, stood by a railing gilded with ivy, diamonds at her throat arranged like a kept promise. Her smile was the kind that has been rehearsed until it learned to live without oxygen. Daniel lifted the camellia, unable to say why the moment felt as precise as a dotted line across fate. Her eyes softened, catching something from the boy's earnest hands that etiquette had never taught her to receive. The room tried to swallow the odd tenderness, a cough of disapproval stifled in silk gloves. Daniel offered the flower with both hands, as if returning a small piece of the world that had been mislaid. Helena accepted, and felt the stem bite gently against her palm, where a ribbon had been tied too carefully to be accidental. The ribbon was pale blue, the color of hospital corridors remembered in fragments, and it laced the green like a whispered instruction. Threads crossed in a patient knot, and under their neatness a tiny cloth tag breathed with the pulse of a name. Helena's fingers trembled with a knowledge stored in bone, the way cold knows glass without needing language. She teased the ribbon loose and the tag turned, slow as a leaf finding the wind's face. 5 letters looked up at her, stitched by someone who believed that fabric could keep time. Gabriel. Light tilted in the chandelier, and for a moment the crystals swam like tears that had finally learned to fall. The orchestra missed a step and recovered, yet the music returned thinner, as if afraid of what had entered the room. The smell of the camellia widened into antiseptic, thunder, and lullabies sung to a cradle that never breathed. A distant monitor beeped in memory, and a doctor's mouth formed words that had frozen her life into a single winter. 30 years compressed into the space beneath her thumbnail, where she pressed the letters as if they might bruise back into the past. Across the conservatory, portraits seemed to lean closer, hungry for scandal, or perhaps for mercy. Daniel watched, unsure whether he had done something lovely or unforgivable, heart knocking like a bird that wants both sky and shelter. The ribbon slid across Helena's skin, leaving a line that felt like the first sentence of a confession. She raised the tag to the light, and the diamonds at her throat flickered as if they knew how cheap they had always been. Somewhere behind them, a glass chimed against a spoon, announcing a toast that no one heard. Arthur Valmont tracked the scene from the mezzanine, jaw fixed, the exact angle a man chooses when he suspects affection is a threat to control. The guests performed indifference, and their curiosity sprang leaks, pulling at their shoes as they pretended to admire orchids. Rosa, near the service corridor, felt old instructions flare. the kind that say silence can be loyalty when truth is lethal. Helena fought for air, and the flower seemed to weigh more than a child, more than a lifetime shaped to fit a lie. Daniel searched her face and found waves he could not name, tides returning to shores he had never seen. The bough of blue ribbon loosened completely, and the camellia nodded as if agreeing to something sacred and dangerous. A draft slipped through the conservatory doors, and candles guttered, carving brief caverns in the light. The orchestra fell away until only the small sounds remained, a petal landing, a breath catching, a heartbeat choosing. Helena swallowed the name as if tasting it could make it real, and the taste was metal and salt and forgiveness asking permission. Arthur started down the stairs, each step a verdict, each polished riser a history he thought money had archived. Rosa took one step forward and stopped. While every year she had kept folded inside her apron rose up and asked to be counted. Daniel whispered without sound, lips shaping a question that had more future than he knew what to do with. The camellia slipped from Helena's hand, white against black marble, a small moon falling through a private night. The tag with Gabriel swung once, found stillness, and pointed like a compass at the woman who could no longer pretend she was lost. Helena's knees softened, her eyes filled, and before anyone could move, tears broke, just as Arthur reached her with a word that would change everything. In the hush after the drop, Helena steadied herself against the railing as the room tilted like a ship in fog. The tag pressed to her pulse, and the syllables of Gabriel returned with the gravity of a planet reclaiming orbit. Thunder from 30 winters ago rolled through sterilized corridors, the taste of iodine and lullabies bruising her tongue. She remembered a doctor's eyes not meeting hers, a signature dragged across grief as if paperwork could bury breath. Diamonds rasped against her throat when she swallowed, suddenly heavy as coins paid to a ferryman she had never met. Guests shifted, rearranging concern into gossip, their kindness measured like appetizers that never fed anyone. The camellia lay pristine on the marble, a small constellation refusing to obey the night. Daniel hovered, wanting to help and fearing he already had, fingers still curved into the shape of an offering. From above, Arthur descended with the force of a closing book, his expression binding the pages shut. Rosa's hand found the seam of her apron, the familiar crease where secrets had learned to breathe. The chandeliers sang in a cold register, crystal tongues striking notes that kept time with Helena's racing heart. She knew that if she spoke too soon, the truth would shatter like glass before anyone learned how to hold it. The ribbon lay on her palm like a path, and every step on it spelled a name she had never allowed herself to walk. The portraits stared, oil deep and patient, as if they had always known the cost of pretending to be perfect. Arthur arrived beside her with a smile that asked for obedience and a voice already sharpening into accusation. "What exactly is this performance?" Arthur murmured, low enough to sound intimate and loud enough to command compliance. Helena kept her eyes on the tag, because looking up would turn steel into ash, and she needed steel until the right moment. "A flower from the greenhouse," Daniel said, voice steadying like a novice swimmer finding the wall. Arthur glanced at the ribbon as if it were a trespass, a stain that could be buffed from the family crest. "My mother is not an exhibit," he added, and the orchestra obediently softened to the volume of delicate denial. Helena felt the urge to apologize to her son for bleeding in public, then remembered who had torn the vein. Rosa edged closer, every step a negotiation between fear of losing shelter and duty to someone who had lost a child. The name on the cloth burned clear as a lighthouse through fog, and Helena could not unsee its steady mercy. "Where did you get this ribbon?" Arthur pressed Daniel, the question shaped like a trap sprung long ago. It was already tied, Daniel answered, surprised at how truth made him taller, how honesty wore its own suit. Arthur's laugh was polished silver, showing reflections but no depth, a sound designed to remind people who paid the bill. Then someone is playing a cruel joke, he concluded, and the guests nodded, relieved to be told what to believe. Helena finally lifted her head, and the room discovered that a gentle woman can look like a verdict when hope returns. Cruelty would be to ignore it, she said, and for the first time the diamonds at her throat felt like borrowed thunder. Arthur's gaze shifted, not to his mother, not to Daniel, but to Rosa, where a flicker of panic betrayed that he recognized the ribbon. The music ended, leaving the conservatory full of breaths that did not know whether to come or go. Arthur signaled to a waiter, and the party resumed on script, as if sound could sand down the edges of a scream. Helena closed her fist around the tag until thread bit skin, grateful for pain that could be counted. Somewhere within the estate, a grandfather clock announced 9, each chime stepping deeper into a corridor she had avoided. Daniel stooped to lift the camellia, and when he placed it back in Helena's hands, something like home moved through her fingers. Rosa dared the final step, eyes brimming with a map she had memorized by heartache rather than ink. Helena looked at her, and in that glance 2 women measured the weight of years traded to protect a house that had not protected them. Not now, Arthur sliced, voice smooth as satin drawn over a blade, and the staff froze into practiced compliance. The conservatory doors opened to the night, and a draft carried the scent of rain and asphalt and waiting ambulances from another life. Helena realized the only way out was forward, and forward required opening a door that had been sealed by money and fear. Tomorrow, she said softly to Rosa, a promise that sounded like a plan stitched exactly 15 letters long. Daniel felt the plan thread itself through him too, weaving courage where he had once stored silence. Arthur offered his arm to his mother. She did not take it, and in that refusal the lineage creaked. Guests applauded a speech no one would remember, trying to bury the evening under clatter and dessert. Above the applause, a single sentence formed in Helena's mind with the certainty of weather. Find the man who told me my child died, before someone makes this ribbon disappear. The mansion slept uneasily, walls digesting whispers they were built to contain. Rain brushed against the windows in slow confession, tracing the outlines of stories too tired to lie. Helena sat on the edge of her bed, the blue ribbon stretched across her knees like an old photograph come alive. Her reflection in the mirror looked younger and crueler, the way grief sometimes returns wearing its original face. The lamp glowed a reluctant gold, revealing the exhaustion of someone who has carried silence as inheritance. She remembered the hospital's white noise, antiseptic air, wheels humming over linoleum, her voice asking again and again if he'd breathed. A doctor had promised rest, and rest became years. Time was anesthetic, then cage, then habit. Now the stitches of Gabriel's name glimmered like small, steady stars calling her toward unfinished truth. She wanted to wake Arthur and demand answers, but he had inherited his father's talent for dismissal and his mother's capacity for denial. Instead, she called for Rosa, the only person who had ever looked at her without measuring profit or pity. The maid appeared quietly, robe tied, eyes swollen from tears she had no right to cry. The ribbon lay between them like evidence neither dared to touch. "Do you recognize this?" Helena asked, voice brittle enough to cut its own echo. Rosa nodded once, then shook her head, performing a lie that trembled at the seams. Helena leaned closer, scent of lavender and accusation blending, and whispered, "Then tell me why it smells like the night my son died." Rosa's throat closed on memory. She saw again the corridor, The storm, the envelope of cash pressed into her palm by a man who did not believe mothers mattered. The order had been simple: take the infant, leave the city, and forget the name she'd heard whispered through morphine fog. She had raised Daniel believing that mercy sometimes requires deceit, that love could be enough to cleanse a sin of obedience. Now that lie stood under chandelier light, dressed in blue silk and demanding lineage. "I can't," Rosa managed, but the words cracked under the weight of 30 years. Helena's hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not cruelly, but with the desperation of someone drowning who recognizes the only other survivor. "You can," Helena said, each syllable a command carved out of broken faith. Their eyes locked, and the silence between them filled with every lullaby sung to the wrong cradle. Rosa wanted to confess, to release the truth before it rotted into tragedy, but footsteps echoed down the corridor. Arthur's voice called his mother's name, sharp and alert. Rosa tore her wrist free, retreating into shadow like guilt learning to walk again. Helena folded the ribbon quickly, hiding it inside the book of family psalms on her nightstand. Arthur appeared at the door, face composed, eyes calculating damage. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Helena smiled too easily, just remembering. When he left, she exhaled the lie and reached for the psalms again. The ribbon pulsed faintly in the lamplight, threads trembling as if aware of its power to reorder bloodlines. Helena pressed it between the pages of Psalm 139. "You knit me together in my mother's womb." The irony landed softly, but its echo promised thunder. Downstairs, Rosa leaned against the kitchen sink, the house pressing on her from all sides. She knew the clock had restarted. Every secret has an expiration date. Daniel, asleep in the servants' quarters, dreamed of a woman crying in a hospital bed, though he had never seen her face. Somewhere deep inside him, something recognized the scent of that ribbon and the word it carried. Helena blew out the lamp, and the darkness thickened, waiting for the morning to demand witnesses. Dawn arrived like a question without punctuation, pale and hesitant through the rain-streaked windows. The estate's fountains murmured to themselves, water echoing through empty courtyards where birds avoided landing. Helena descended the marble staircase in a robe the color of resignation, every step echoing against the hush of servants pretending not to watch. She found Daniel in the corridor, carrying fresh linens, his expression caught between humility and wonder. For a moment, sunlight hit the blue ribbon still faintly tied around his wrist from the night before. He had kept it without knowing why. Helena froze, unable to breathe. The ribbon looked back at her like proof. Arthur appeared behind her, polished and impatient, already dressed for the day's meetings, his tie knotted tighter than his conscience. His gaze followed hers and landed on the ribbon, calculation flickering like lightning behind calm eyes. "Didn't we discuss boundaries, Mother?" he said lightly, as if politeness could sterilize suspicion. Daniel lowered his head, clutching the linens closer, the gesture small but defiant, the way honesty sometimes hides inside obedience. Helena turned toward Arthur, her tone controlled, but her pulse drummed the old rhythm of loss. "It's a ribbon, not a rebellion," she replied, but the tremor beneath her words betrayed the storm she carried. Arthur's smile thinned. "In this house, even ribbons have consequences." He reached toward Daniel, fingers brushing the boy's wrist, and in that contact Helena saw cruelty disguised as care. Rosa entered then, her heart stuttering, realizing the past was walking straight toward the truth she'd tried to bury alive. The linen slipped from Daniel's hands, a white flag falling onto marble that had never known surrender. Arthur's hand closed on the ribbon, intending to tear it off, but Helena's voice, low and deliberate, halted him mid-motion. "Don't touch him," she said. The words weighted with something even Arthur had not yet learned to challenge. A few maids gasped softly, their fear curving the air. Arthur released the ribbon with theatrical restraint, stepping back as if granting mercy. "Very well," he said, smiling for the witnesses, "but I'll not have staff exploiting your kindness for spectacle." Helena's eyes stayed on Daniel. He was kind when no one else remembered how. The boy blinked, unsure if he was being defended or offered as symbol, but grateful for the warmth threading through her tone. Arthur turned toward Rosa, seeing in her posture the quiet tremor of someone carrying too much history. "You were there that night," he said suddenly, voice soft but aimed like a knife. "The hospital. My father's orders." Rosa's breath left her body in a single, broken sound. Helena's eyes widened. "What night?" Arthur smiled faintly. "The one you've chosen to forget." For the first time, Rosa understood that Arthur knew more than he had ever let on, and that his silence had never been ignorance, but control. Helena stepped closer, confusion cracking through her composure. "Arthur, what are you saying?" Her tone was half command, half prayer. He adjusted his cufflinks, buying time the way liars do before unveiling partial truths. "I'm saying," he murmured, "that loyalty isn't always noble, and some secrets are expensive for a reason." Helena's throat went dry, her mind chasing fragments. The missing death certificate, the sealed hospital records, the envelopes her husband burned without reading. Rosa stared at the marble floor, the ribbon's reflection trembling in her tears. Daniel wanted to speak, to defend Rosa, but instinct told him this was a room where words turned to traps. Helena's voice rose, sharper now. "If you know something, you'll tell me." Arthur's answer was a cold smile. "You wouldn't survive knowing, Mother." Then he walked away, leaving silence shaped like confession and threat intertwined. Helena turned to Rosa, her voice breaking for the first time. "He knows. God, he knows." Rosa shook her head. "Then we have less time than I hoped." Outside, thunder cracked again, as if the storm had been waiting for permission to return. The rain thickened into a steady percussion against the mansion's tall windows, a rhythm that pulled Helena backward through time. She sat at her writing desk, surrounded by fragments of forgotten years. Hospital papers yellowed like old bruises, half-burned letters, a photo of her late husband whose eyes never truly met hers. The name Gabriel echoed between the walls, soft at first, then louder, as if the house itself had remembered something forbidden. She opened the bottom drawer where memories had been locked beneath social invitations and condolence notes. A hospital wristband clinked against silver pens, its plastic cracked but legible. Patient, Helena Valmont. Infant, Gabriel. The handwriting felt familiar and cruel. She ran her finger over it until her skin stung. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating portraits of her ancestors. Men and women who built empires from secrets and silence. Each painted smile seemed to mock her for daring to feel. Helena's breath grew uneven as she realized how easily grief can be polished into tradition. The truth she sought had waited in her own drawer, gathering dust until courage decided to breathe again. She stood abruptly, heart pounding, and knew what she had to do. There was only one man alive who could tell her what really happened that night, Dr. Leonard Bryce, the obstetrician who vanished after signing her son's death certificate. Somewhere, in another part of the house, Rosa was whispering prayers for a secret that no longer wanted to stay buried. Down in the servants' kitchen, Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, staring at the storm through the small window above the sink. Every drop that struck the glass sounded like a clock ticking down her time. Daniel sat at the table repairing a torn shirt, his fingers nimble from years of mending what others discarded. "Rosa, are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the tenderness of someone who doesn't yet know he's in danger. She looked at him and saw both the child she had raised and the one she had stolen. The guilt was heavier than the thunder outside. She wanted to tell him everything, to free them both, but her tongue betrayed her with silence. Instead, she said, "Some things in this house aren't meant to stay quiet forever." Daniel frowned, confused. Did something happen? Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Arthur's assistant appeared with a polite nod. "Mr. Valmont wishes to see you, Rosa." Now, her stomach turned cold. She wiped her hands again, though they were already clean. She followed the man, every step feeling like the return to a crime scene. Daniel watched her go, sensing that something precious was unraveling just beyond his reach. Arthur's study smelled of leather, old books, and distrust. He sat behind his father's mahogany desk, sunlight broken by blinds cutting his face into stripes of power and fatigue. Rosa stood before him, fingers twisting her apron, the rhythm betraying panic. "You've been with this family for 30 years, he began smoothly. "So I'll assume loyalty means something to you." Rosa nodded, unable to find breath. Arthur tapped a folder on the desk. "This came from the hospital archives. You signed a release form the night my brother was born." Her body went rigid. He leaned forward, voice lowering to a dangerous calm. "Tell me why my mother still believes that child died." The word brother hung between them like thunder waiting to strike. Rosa's lips trembled, but before she could answer, Helena's voice called from the doorway. "Because lies were easier for men like you to live with." Arthur froze, his mask slipping just enough to show fear beneath arrogance. Helena stepped inside, holding the wristband in one hand and the truth in the other. "Now," she said, eyes locked on him, "we'll see which of us survives the truth." The air in Arthur's study thickened, heavy with the scent of polished deceit and rain-soaked earth drifting through the open window. Helena stood near the doorway, her hair damp from the storm, holding the cracked hospital wristband like a relic that refused to die. Arthur's eyes flickered from his mother to Rosa, calculating which one would break first. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides fear behind etiquette, and gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit, Mother," he said smoothly. "We don't need theatrics." Helena didn't move. "You mean the truth doesn't require an audience?" Rosa's knees weakened. Her hands trembled against the apron that had dried generations of Valmont tears. The storm outside moaned against the shutters, a warning disguised as wind. Arthur leaned back, his voice dropping to something cold and deliberate. "Tell her, Rosa. Tell her what my father paid you for." Rosa's face blanched, eyes glistening as if light itself was guilty of witnessing her silence. Helena turned sharply toward her, confusion cracking into terror. "Paid you?" she repeated, each syllable trembling. "For what?" Rosa opened her mouth, but the words fractured against 30 years of loyalty, fear, and misplaced love. "I did what I was told," she whispered finally. "I thought I was protecting you." Helena's face drained of color, her fingers tightening around the wristband until plastic cut skin. Arthur's grin sharpened. "Protecting her? You stole her child." The confession shattered whatever air remained between them. Rosa covered her face, sobs shaking through her body like confession through an old cathedral. "I didn't steal him. I saved him," she gasped. "Your father ordered it. He said the baby must disappear." Helena staggered backward, the floor tilting beneath her like the deck of a sinking ship. "My husband?" she whispered, as if the word itself could still mean safety. "Why?" Arthur's voice softened cruelly. "Because Gabriel was proof of betrayal, a scandal that could ruin everything. My father knew the truth before you did." Helena's heart stuttered, a beat skipping between past and present. Rosa fell to her knees, clutching the hem of Helena's robe. He wanted the child gone. I couldn't let him die. I ran that night. I raised him as my own. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking dust from the chandeliers like ash from an old fire. Arthur watched, silent and composed, but his knuckles whitened on the edge of the desk. "His name isn't Gabriel anymore," Rosa whispered. "It's Daniel." The world stopped. Helena froze mid-breath, and Arthur's composure shattered in the reflection of the glass cabinet. The secret had finally spoken, and it had chosen the wrong room to breathe in. Helena's cry rose raw and human, unfit for marble walls. She fell against the desk, the wristband slipping from her grasp and landing at Arthur's feet. He stared down at it, as if it were a fuse he'd always known existed but never wanted lit. Rosa sobbed harder, her words tumbling into apologies that no language could clean. "Daniel is your son," she said again, louder this time, the truth echoing through the hall like bells announcing a funeral and a birth at once. Arthur lifted his gaze, fury and disbelief colliding in his pupils. That boy? The maid's son. The title burned as it left his mouth. Helena looked up slowly, her tears gleaming like glass. "No," she said, voice breaking but sure. "The maid's son is my son, and yours is the lie we've all been living." Outside, lightning split the sky in two, and the storm seemed to bow to the truth finally spoken aloud. Rosa covered her ears, sobbing, as Helena whispered the name again, Gabriel, as if saying it could summon back every lost year. Arthur turned away, jaw tight, realizing that in trying to preserve power, he had just destroyed the only thing that ever made him untouchable, his mother's trust. The storm eased into drizzle, leaving the world muted and raw, as though the air itself needed to recover from what it had heard. Helena sat in the dim parlor, the glow of a single candle pulling trembling shadows across her face. The hospital wristband lay on the table beside a small wooden box that Rosa had carried into the room moments earlier. It was worn smooth by decades of secrets. Its latch trembled under Helena's fingertips, as if the object itself feared what lived inside. When she opened it, a faint scent of lavender and mothballs escaped, familiar, maternal, and cruel. Inside lay a photograph curled by age, a newborn swaddled in white, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as though whispering a future no one wanted to hear. Pinned beside it was a scrap of fabric embroidered with a single letter, G. Helena's tears fell silently, tracing the exact shape of the past she had lost. Rosa stood nearby, head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her like someone waiting for judgment. Daniel's name now lived between them like a fragile candle no wind could extinguish. Helena touched the photograph, her fingertips trembling against the faint outline of her son's cheek. "I held him," she murmured, "just for a moment. Then they told me he was gone." Her voice cracked, a sound older than grief. Rosa stepped forward, whispering. He never stopped breathing. I heard his first cry. The candle's flame flickered violently, as if startled by the sound of truth. Helena turned to Rosa, her expression a collision of gratitude and fury. "You saved him," she said, her voice trembling. "But you also stole him from me." Rosa nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. "I know, and I've prayed every day that God would let you forgive me." Helena pressed the photo to her chest, the paper bending against her heartbeat. "I don't know if I can, but I need to see him." Rosa hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a smaller picture, newer, uncreased. Daniel at 12, standing in front of the estate's garden, holding a basket of flowers. Helena studied it, her eyes widening as she recognized a familiar shape in his expression, the same quiet gentleness her husband once despised. Every feature felt like a memory returned to flesh. "How could I have not seen it?" she whispered. Rosa closed her eyes. "Because love is blind when it's been trained to look only upward." The words struck deep. Helena's breath hitched, then steadied. She placed both photographs side by side, the newborn and the young man, and the resemblance bound the room in silent revelation. Outside, the first sunlight broke through clouds, slicing the gray morning into fragile gold. It painted Daniel's face in the picture as if blessing him with the dawn. The front door creaked somewhere below, and footsteps approached slowly, hesitant, careful, unaware of the storm waiting upstairs. Helena looked toward the sound, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of each step. Rosa turned pale. "He's here," she whispered. Daniel entered the parlor doorway, clutching a bundle of folded linens. He froze at the sight of the two women, their tear-streaked faces illuminated by the flicker of the candle and the glow of his own photograph. Helena rose from her chair, one hand trembling over her heart. He frowned, confused by her expression, the mix of awe, pain, and recognition. "Mrs. Valmont?" he asked softly, but the title felt foreign in his mouth now. Helena stepped closer, holding out the photo with shaking fingers. This is you." Daniel glanced down at it, then back at her, uncertainty flickering into something deeper. Instinct, blood, destiny. Rosa covered her mouth, knowing that no storm could undo what was about to be spoken. Helena's next words fell like the last piece of a puzzle locking into place. "Gabriel," she whispered, "you came home." The moment hung in the air like a suspended breath, too fragile to exhale. Daniel stood frozen in the parlor doorway, his eyes searching Helena's trembling face for meaning his heart already sensed. The sound of rain faded into silence, replaced by the heavy ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Helena's fingers reached for him, hesitant, as though afraid that touch might dissolve the miracle before her. Daniel stepped back, confusion furrowing his brow. His voice wavered between disbelief and fear. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "Gabriel." The name felt strange and sacred all at once, echoing in the corners of his chest. Rosa took a trembling step forward. "It's the truth, Daniel. You were never mine by blood. You were hers." The words struck like thunder without sound, shattering the invisible walls of the house that had kept them apart. Helena's tears fell freely now, her smile trembling with the ache of lost decades. But before she could bridge the distance, a sharp sound sliced through the fragile silence, the clatter of breaking glass from the hallway. Rosa turned first, startled. Helena flinched, clutching her heart. Then came Arthur's voice, steady, smooth, and venomous. "If we're trading heirlooms today, someone's missing one." He stepped into the room holding a velvet jewelry box, empty, the family's heirloom necklace gone. His gaze locked on Daniel, and the warmth drained from the air. Arthur's words dripped with accusation disguised as civility. "How poetic," he said softly, pacing closer. "The lost son appears, and so does our missing treasure vanish." Convenient timing. Helena straightened, fury sharpening her grief. "Don't you dare." Arthur ignored her, eyes fixed on Daniel. "Did she tell you to take it? Or was this your own idea of repayment for our kindness?" Daniel's face paled, his voice cracking under disbelief. "I didn't take anything." Rosa moved in front of him, her posture small but defiant. "He would never." Arthur cut her off with a wave of his hand. "You taught him to steal once. Why not again?" Helena gasped, her son's cruelty blooming like poison in the room. Arthur, enough. But he was relentless, feeding on the tension that made him feel powerful again. He turned to the butler at the door. "Search his quarters." The man hesitated, glancing toward Helena, but Arthur's glare overruled hesitation. Rosa clutched Daniel's arm, whispering, "Say nothing, please." Daniel's heart pounded as footsteps echoed down the corridor, toward the small room that held all he owned in the world. Helena tried to intervene, but Arthur's voice rose above her. "Let's see how honest our miracle really is." The candle flickered violently, throwing their shadows across the wall like ghosts reenacting a crime. Minutes later, the butler returned, breathless, holding something wrapped in cloth. He opened it slowly. Inside gleamed the missing necklace, the Valmont sapphire, its deep blue mirroring the ribbon still tied around Daniel's wrist. The room gasped. Rosa staggered backward as if struck. Arthur smiled triumphantly. "I suppose blood isn't the only thing he inherited." Daniel shook his head, horror widening his eyes. "That's not mine, I swear." Helena stepped forward, but her words faltered, torn between instinct and evidence. Arthur turned toward her, tone dripping mock sympathy. "You see, Mother? The boy you pity was raised in lies. It's all he knows." Rosa broke down completely, sobbing. "Arthur, no. I took it." The confession cracked through the air like lightning. Arthur froze, disbelief flickering behind contempt. "You?" "Yes," she cried. "I took it to sell, to run, to keep him safe. He knew nothing." Helena's world tilted again, grief folding into awe, because even after decades of deception, Rosa's love was still a shield. Arthur's jaw tightened, fury replacing victory. "Then you'll both leave this house tonight." Helena's voice rose, clear and sharp. "No. If anyone leaves, it's you." And for the first time in his life, Arthur saw in his mother's eyes the authority that no inheritance could buy. Night returned to the Valmont mansion heavy with the weight of revelation. The air crackled with arguments left unfinished, and silence threaded its way through corridors that had once hummed with order. Rosa sat in the servants' quarters, face pale, hands clasped tightly, as if still holding Daniel's childhood within them. Helena paced her room above, the hospital wristband clutched in one hand, the empty jewelry box in the other. Her son slept somewhere beyond those walls, a storm she could no longer calm. Yet the truth had begun its own awakening, and she knew it would not rest until every lie was named. On the table beside her sat an old address card, one she'd found hidden in her late husband's files. Dr. Leonard Bryce, Ashmore Clinic, Brighton. The handwriting was her husband's, dated 30 years earlier. Her pulse quickened. The doctor who vanished. The man who declared her child dead. She understood now. Every road led to him. Helena slipped the wristband into her purse, tied a shawl around her shoulders, and rang for the driver. When he did not answer, likely dismissed by Arthur, she went herself, taking the smaller car from the garage under the cover of thunder. The mansion gates opened with a groan, as if the house itself knew it was losing its last illusion of control. In the rearview mirror, the lights of Valmont Estate faded like guilt disappearing into fog. Inside, Daniel lay awake, unaware that the mother he'd only just found was driving toward the truth that could destroy them both. The Ashmore Clinic sat at the edge of the city like a ghost that refused to leave. Its brick walls, once red, had dulled to the color of dried blood. Its windows blinked under the storm's flashes. Helena hesitated before entering, her heels echoing down the linoleum hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. A nurse at the desk looked up, startled by the apparition of wealth in the ruin. "I'm looking for Dr. Leonard Bryce," Helena said, voice steady but breath trembling. The nurse frowned. "Dr. Bryce retired years ago, ma'am. Lives out by the coast. Room 12, Winmere Care Home." Helena nodded, pressing a folded note into the woman's hand, a remnant of the power she still commanded. Moments later, she was back in the car, tires slicing through puddles, headlights illuminating the dark spine of the road. Each mile carried the weight of unborn words, questions too heavy to survive daylight. By the time she reached Windmere, the storm had turned into a mist that clung to her coat like regret. Inside, the hall smelled of medicine and endings. She found room 12 at the far end, door half open, a dim light flickering against a wall lined with photos of faces long forgotten. An old man sat by the window, frail and hollow-eyed, staring into the gray beyond. When Helena whispered, "Dr. Bryce?" he turned, and the guilt that flickered in his eyes told her she had found the right man. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he gestured for her to sit, voice rough with rusted conscience. "I wondered when someone would come." Helena's throat tightened. "You told me my son was dead." He nodded slowly, shame clouding his gaze. "I told you what I was ordered to say." Her pulse thundered. "Ordered? By whom?" The doctor's fingers trembled as they reached for a drawer. "By your husband. He paid me to falsify the report. He said the child wasn't his." Helena's breath caught. The room tilted, her whole life rearranged around the weight of one sentence. Bryce continued, his tone breaking like brittle glass. "But the baby lived. Your maid, Rosa, she begged me to save him. I helped her leave. It was the only mercy left." Tears blurred Helena's vision. "You let me mourn a ghost for 30 years. He nodded, defeated, because truth was dangerous. And now, I suspect, it still is. Helena rose slowly, fury crystallizing into resolve. Then it's time danger changed sides. She turned toward the door, the storm outside whispering approval as thunder rolled across the coast like the sound of justice awakening. Behind her, Dr. Bryce whispered her son's name, Gabriel, as if saying it one last time might earn him peace. Helena drove back toward the city as dawn bled pale and uncertain across the horizon. The road was slick and silver, reflecting fragments of the morning she had waited 30 years to see. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The truth burned behind her ribs like fire contained too long. The words of Dr. Bryce repeated in her mind. Your husband ordered it. The baby lived. Every mile tightened the coil of anger inside her until it hummed like a live wire. By the time she reached the mansion gates, the storm had thinned to drizzle, the world washed but not yet clean. She parked near the servants' entrance, unwilling to alert Arthur to her return. Inside, the house was silent except for the faint ticking of the hall clock, a metronome marking the rhythm of her fury. Rosa waited in the kitchen, eyes swollen, hands trembling over an untouched cup of tea. When Helena entered, Rosa rose, expecting accusation, perhaps dismissal. Instead, Helena simply said, I saw him. Rosa blinked. Dr. Bryce? Yes, he told me everything. Her voice was calm, but the calm was the kind that comes before something breaks. Rosa's tears began again, but Helena reached across the table and took her hand. You saved my son, but I won't let another man bury him in lies. Above them, soft footsteps creaked across the floorboards. Daniel, already awake, unaware that his name had just been resurrected. Later that morning, Helena called for Arthur. He arrived in the drawing room with his usual confidence, tie perfect, expression neutral, unaware that the battlefield had already been chosen. Helena stood by the window, the morning light painting her in shades of steel. You lied to me, she said without turning. Arthur's brows knit together. Mother, I don't. Your father lied, she interrupted, turning slowly to face him. And you protected that lie. He froze, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Her eyes gleamed with knowledge that no argument could erase. You knew, she continued. You knew Gabriel lived. You knew Rosa took him. You let me mourn my son while you played the perfect heir. Arthur's jaw clenched. The the smooth veneer of his control beginning to fracture. "You don't understand what was at stake," he said tightly. "Everything Father built was built on a grave that never existed." Helena cut in. "And now it will crumble." For the first time, Arthur looked uncertain. "What are you going to do?" Helena's voice softened, but the softness carried the force of thunder. "I'm going to tell the truth." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you do, you destroy the Valmont name." Helena met his gaze. "Then let it burn." That night, Helena gathered Daniel and Rosa in the parlor once more. The room that had once hosted galas now held only 3 hearts beating in fragile unison. Candles burned low, their light trembling across portraits of ancestors who no longer deserved reverence. Helena told them everything: the doctor, the payment, the falsified death, the lies dressed as legacy. Daniel sat motionless, his world cracking open with every word. He felt both stolen and chosen, angry and grateful, emotions colliding too quickly to name. When she finished, he whispered, "Why tell me now?" "Because," Helena said softly, "truth delayed is cruelty continued." Rosa wiped her tears, nodding in silent agreement. Helena turned toward the doorway, where Arthur's shadow lingered, eavesdropping like guilt personified. "Tomorrow," she said aloud, "we end this publicly." Arthur stepped out of the shadows, his face pale. "You wouldn't." But he saw it in her eyes, the calm certainty of someone who had nothing left to fear. Helena looked back at her son, the ribbon still around his wrist. "Gabriel deserves his name," she said quietly, "and I will make the world say it." Outside, thunder rolled once more, not as warning, but as applause. Morning broke cold and bright, slicing the estate into fragments of gold and shadow. Helena stood in the grand hall, sunlight spilling across the marble floors like judgment made visible. Arthur entered, phone in hand, the calm of a man rehearsing control. "I've spoken with the board," he said curtly. "If you go through with this, telling anyone, you'll destroy the Valmont Foundation, the company, our reputation." Helena faced him, unflinching. "Reputation is a costume stitched from other people's silence." Arthur's lips tightened. "And you'd strip it away because of a Maid story?" Her eyes flared. "Because of a mother's truth." He paced before her like a lawyer before a guilty jury. "Mother, you're emotional. Think of the consequences." She laughed, low, broken, dangerous. "I've been thinking of consequences for 30 years. The echo filled the hall, sharp and alive. Arthur stopped pacing. "What do you want?" Money for him? Recognition? The name Valmont isn't charity. Helena took a step forward, her presence towering despite her fragility. "I want you to stop calling your brother him." Arthur froze, color draining from his face. "Daniel will be recognized," she said. "He will be my son in name, blood, and record." Arthur's jaw tightened. He whispered through his teeth, "Over my dead body." Helena didn't blink. "You might finally make your father proud." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You think you can rewrite history? You'll humiliate yourself," he said, tone cracking under strain. Helena turned toward the staircase, where portraits of long-dead Valmonts lined the wall, their painted eyes heavy with judgment. "History has already been rewritten," she replied. "I'm just restoring the original draft." Arthur followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Do you think they'd approve? Father built everything for me, for his true heir." Helena faced him again, her voice calm but lethal. "He built it for control. You just inherited the addiction." The words landed like a slap. Arthur's composure faltered, then snapped back into its usual icy precision. "You won't win," he said quietly. "No one will believe you." "Then I'll show them," Helena replied. "At tonight's charity gala, in front of everyone who ever bowed to your name." Arthur blinked, startled. "You wouldn't dare." But he saw in her eyes the certainty of someone who has already crossed the point of return. "I've spent half my life mourning a son who wasn't dead," she said. "The other half starts tonight." Arthur's fists clenched, veins rising under his skin. "Mother," he said, voice low and trembling, "you're going to regret this." "Perhaps," she said, "but for the first time, it will be my own choice." That evening, the mansion glowed with chandeliers and deceit. Guests arrived in glitter and perfume, laughter rising like smoke from fires long extinguished. Daniel stood by the servants' entrance, adjusting the collar of his only suit. Borrowed, too tight, too honest for this house. Rosa fussed over him, smoothing wrinkles, whispering prayers under her breath. Helena appeared at the top of the grand staircase, regal, resolved, radiant in defiance. Her diamonds glimmered less than her purpose. Arthur watched from the crowd below, face composed but eyes storming. When their gazes met, the music faltered for a heartbeat, the calm before collision. Helena lifted her glass for a toast, her voice carrying across the room. "To truth," she said. "Even when it arrives late, it still finds its way home." The guests smiled, confused, unaware that the name about to be spoken would unravel generations of lies. Arthur moved closer, his voice a whisper edged with threat. "Don't do this." But Helena only smiled, sadly, beautifully, then nodded toward the stage where a single spotlight waited. For the first time, she was no longer afraid of what her name might cost. Applause echoed faintly through the ballroom as Helena stepped toward the stage, the sound hollow beneath the weight of expectation. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above her, refracting the light into fractured halos that seemed to bless and curse in equal measure. She moved with the composure of someone who had finally decided to stop trembling. At the podium, her reflection glimmered on polished glass, the image of a woman everyone thought they knew. She set her champagne aside, pressed a hand to her chest, and began. 30 years ago, she said, voice steady yet fragile, this family buried a lie so elegant that even I believed it. A ripple of confusion ran through the guests. Fans paused mid-wave, murmurs thickened like fog. Arthur, standing at the foot of the stage, felt the floor tilt under the precision of his mother's calm. Helena's eyes swept the crowd, settling on Daniel, who lingered near the far doors, uncertain if he should be there. Tonight, she continued, we correct what should never have been written. Arthur moved closer, hissing, enough. But she ignored him. My son, my firstborn, did not die at birth. He was taken, hidden, raised among those we looked down upon. The room erupted in disbelief. Gasps collided with clinking glasses, chairs scraped marble. Helena lifted her hand for silence, her eyes glistening with tears that gleamed like absolution. And tonight, she said softly, he stands among you. Daniel froze as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Rosa covered her mouth, tears spilling freely, pride and terror twisting together inside her. Arthur's composure fractured, his mask of civility shattered into something raw and dangerous. You've lost your mind, he barked, his voice cutting across the stunned audience. Helena did not flinch. No, Arthur. I've finally found it. She motioned toward Daniel. Come here, Gabriel. He hesitated, trembling, until Rosa whispered, go. Each step he took across the ballroom floor felt like walking through generations of judgment. The whispers grew, words like impossible, bastard, scandal darting through the crowd like blades. When he reached the stage, Helena took his hand, her touch firm and proud. This is my son, she declared. My flesh, my blood, the child your patriarch swore had died. Daniel's throat tightened, Tears blurred the brilliance of the chandeliers into halos of mercy. Arthur's fury ignited into motion. He strode forward, voice trembling with rage. "You're humiliating yourself in front of everyone." Helena turned toward him, eyes blazing. "No, Arthur. I'm freeing myself in front of them." The audience held its breath, sensing history tilting on its axis. Arthur climbed the steps to the stage, looming close, his voice low but venomous. "You think they'll believe this? A maid's tale and a boy's luck." Helena faced him, her poise turning sharp. "I have proof. Hospital records, the doctor's confession, and the scar you carry." Arthur blinked, confusion flickering. "What scar?" Helena stepped closer, voice cold as marble. "The one your father gave you when he made you part of his lie. The day he told you your brother was dead, and you believed him." Gasps rippled again. Arthur's face drained of color. "Mother, please," he said, his anger breaking into something desperate. "You'll ruin everything." Helena looked out at the crowd, then back at him. "No, my son. The lie already ruined everything. I'm only turning the lights on." A murmur swept through the room, the kind that signals the world has changed its shape. Helena's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. The Valmont legacy ends tonight. A new one begins, with truth. Daniel's tears fell freely now, but his spine straightened, pride flickering through the ache. Rosa stepped forward from the crowd, unable to contain her emotion, and whispered, "He's everything you lost, and everything you never stopped loving." Arthur looked between them all, his mother, the brother he'd despised without knowing, and the crowd that now saw him as the villain in a story rewritten in real time. The silence that followed was long enough for guilt to find its own reflection. The ballroom emptied slowly, like a wound draining light. Guests dispersed in murmurs, their heels echoing across the marble, leaving behind fragments of whispers and disbelief. Helena stood at the podium long after the music had died, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes alive for the first time in decades. Rosa waited near the doorway, watching Daniel's profile illuminated by the soft glow of the chandeliers. The boy who had grown beneath her roof, now claimed by another kind of love. Arthur lingered at the far end of the room, frozen in the aftermath of his own undoing. He looked smaller beneath the chandeliers, a prince stripped of inheritance, standing beneath a crown made of shame. The thunder outside returned like applause from the heavens, rolling through the glass walls of the estate. Helena stepped down from the stage, each heel click a quiet defiance against the years that had caged her voice. Daniel followed her instinctively, his chest tight, unsure if the night had freed him or made him an exile in two worlds. When they reached the terrace doors, Helena turned, her face soft with maternal wonder. "Come," she whispered. "I want to show you something." She led him out into the rain-soaked gardens where the air smelled of jasmine and rebirth. Raindrops beaded on the marble statues, and moonlight spilled through torn clouds like forgiveness. Beneath the glass awning of the greenhouse, the camellias she once adored bloomed again, white, fragile, defiant. Helena plucked one gently, her hands trembling as she pressed it into Daniel's palm. "It was this flower," she said softly, rain glistening in her hair. "The same one you gave me that night." Daniel stared at it, realization dawning slowly, painfully. "It was never just a flower," she continued. "It was memory, carried back to me by the son I thought I'd buried." He looked down at the petals, still damp, still pure, as thunder rumbled overhead like distant applause. "Why did you keep it alive all these years?" he asked. Helena smiled faintly, her eyes filled with weary pride. "Because some things grow even in silence, even in grief." They stood beneath the rain, a mother and son rediscovering each other in the space between loss and redemption. Behind them, the great house of Valmont shimmered under lightning, beautiful, hollow, and condemned. Inside, Arthur watched from a window, his reflection distorted by raindrops sliding down the glass. For the first time, guilt slipped past the armor he wore so carefully. He saw the flower in Daniel's hand and felt the ache of something he could not name, envy, perhaps, or the faint, forgotten pulse of conscience. When Helena turned her gaze toward the window, their eyes met through the veil of rain. Her expression was neither victory nor vengeance, only release. Arthur stepped back, disappearing into shadow as Helena and Daniel walked toward the garden's heart. Between the rows of wet blossoms, Rosa waited, her eyes glistening with tears she no longer feared to show. The three of them stood together beneath the open sky, not family by name, but by survival. Helena took Rosa's hand and placed it over Daniel's. "You gave him life," she said. "Now let's give him peace." Rosa nodded, her sobs quiet, her heart both breaking and healing at once. Daniel looked from one woman to the other, one who had birthed him, one who had raised him, and felt both truths live inside him without conflict. The rain thickened, baptizing the garden, washing away the years of secrecy. The camellia in his hand wilted gently, surrendering its petals to the earth. Helena smiled through her tears. "Let it fall," she whispered. "Every ending deserves its bloom." In that moment, Daniel understood. The flower had never been about mourning, but about memory learning to breathe again. A flash of lightning turned the garden to silver. Thunder followed like a promise kept. And somewhere deep inside the house, Arthur opened a drawer and pulled out his father's journal, ready, at last, to read the truth he had been running from. But outside, in the rain, mother, son, and heartbroken guardian stood beneath the storm. And for the first time, it did not feel like punishment. Morning arrived damp and weightless, as if even time itself had paused to breathe after what had been confessed. The Valmont gardens glistened under a pale gray light, their fallen camellia petals forming a soft white carpet across the wet grass. Helena walked barefoot, the earth cool beneath her feet, a sensation she had not allowed herself to feel in decades. Each step returned a small fragment of the woman grief had once erased. From the veranda, Rosa watched her quietly, a shawl around her shoulders, her tired face peaceful for the first time in years. Daniel stood by the fountain, his gaze fixed on the water. The reflection staring back at him was not just the young man he had become, but all the years stolen, now finally his again. Helena approached and knelt beside him, ignoring the damp fabric of her dress soaking through. "There's so much to mend," she said softly. "But what wasn't lived can still be honored." Daniel exhaled, his voice rough. "And Arthur?" Helena looked toward the mansion window, where she knew her other son was watching. "Some truths don't redeem," she said quietly. "They only set us free. His will need silence before forgiveness." The fountain rippled, as though the world itself were listening. Helena reached for Daniel's hand, and in that simple touch, the story began again, one that the past could no longer own. Her tears fell into the water, scattering her reflection into widening rings. "You are the name destiny tried to erase," she whispered. "But truth doesn't die. It only waits." Inside the mansion, Arthur sat at his father's desk, reading the old journal that reeked of smoke and guilt. The brittle pages confessed more than he was ready to carry. The price of glory is the guilt that bleeds through blood. He read of the bribe to Dr. Bryce, the threat made against Rosa, the orders whispered under the cover of night. Each sentence weighed heavier than the last. The final line read simply, "Gabriel must disappear." Arthur closed the journal and pressed it against his chest, breathing through the ache. For the first time, pride felt like a burden, not a crown. He glanced out the window, at his mother and the brother he had spent a lifetime resenting. The distance between them was greater than wealth, and far colder. He wanted to go down, to say something, anything, but fear kept him still. Outside, Daniel lifted his gaze and met his eyes. No gesture, no words, just silence, heavy, honest, inherited. Arthur turned away, opened his father's safe, and found a single envelope inside, sealed with the family crest. On it, written in his father's precise hand, was the name Gabriel Valmont. It hit him like a confession carved in stone. He held the envelope, unsure whether to open it or surrender it. Finally, for once in his life, Arthur chose humility. He descended the stairs, the letter trembling in his hand. Helena noticed the door open, the faint sound of footsteps on marble. Arthur walked toward them slowly, shoulders lowered, his face stripped of arrogance and armor. Rosa stepped back, giving him space. He stopped before Helena and Daniel, holding out the envelope like the last offering of a man who had nothing left to hide. "I found this," he said quietly. "It's from Father. I think it belongs to you." Helena reached for it, but Arthur shook his head, his eyes shifting toward Daniel. "No," he murmured. "It's his by right." Daniel accepted the letter, stunned, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Helena placed a hand on his shoulder, pride softening her exhaustion, and turned to Arthur with a gentleness that surprised them both. "There is redemption in admitting the wrong," she said, "even when forgiveness hasn't yet arrived." Arthur nodded faintly, eyes glassy but clear. As he turned to leave, a camellia petal drifted down and landed on his hand. He looked at it for a long moment, breathing deeply, and for the first time, what he felt wasn't weakness, it was relief. The rain began again, light and cleansing, washing the marble, the memories, and the guilt away. The rain lingered through the afternoon, a quiet rhythm against the mansion's stone walls, steady, forgiving, unhurried. In the parlor, Helena sat beside Daniel while Rosa poured tea that neither of them drank. The sealed envelope lay between them on the table, fragile as a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Daniel turned it in his hands, tracing the embossed crest of the Valmont family with trembling fingers. "It feels strange," he said softly, "as if opening it might end one life and begin another." Helena smiled gently. "Perhaps that's what truth does. It ends pretending." With Rosa's silent nod, he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, his father's handwriting, elegant and cruelly calm. "If this letter is found, then the world has undone what I paid to conceal. The boy's life will stain our name, but perhaps cleanse my soul. His name is Gabriel Valmont. He will know love only when someone dares to speak it again." Daniel read it twice, the words sinking deeper each time. Tears blurred the ink, and the paper trembled in his grasp. Helena reached for his hand, her voice soft as rain. "Then let's speak it." She looked toward Rosa, who nodded, her lips trembling. Together they said it, Gabriel. The name filled the room, like music remembered after silence. Daniel exhaled, a sound halfway between grief and rebirth, and whispered, "I think I can finally breathe." That evening, Helena gathered what remained of the family in the great hall. Rosa stood behind Gabriel, hands clasped, her presence humble but unwavering. Arthur arrived last, his eyes wary yet resigned, his voice low when he spoke. "I've made arrangements," he said. "The foundation papers will be changed. The name," he hesitated, "Gabriel Valmont, will be added." Helena nodded once, pride glimmering beneath her exhaustion. "And your father's?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "He doesn't deserve the monument he built on deceit. Let the world know who saved it instead." Gabriel's eyes widened. "Rosa?" Arthur met his gaze. "Yes." She raised the man who'll restore our name. It should bear hers as much as ours. Helena smiled through tears, watching her two sons, one born of blood, the other of bitterness, finally stand in the same light. No forgiveness was spoken, but it began quietly in the spaces between their words. Outside, the storm drifted east, leaving the air bright with possibility. The great hall no longer echoed with pride, but with the fragile sound of peace. For the first time, Helena felt the mansion was breathing again, not as a monument, but as a home. Later, alone in the garden, Gabriel stood before the fountain where everything had started. Moonlight shimmered on the water's surface, silver as memory. He unfolded the letter once more, the paper now soft and worn from his touch. The camellia petals floated nearby, their white fading to translucent edges. He whispered, "Gabriel Valmont," testing the name like a prayer finally answered. It no longer felt like a secret or a burden, it was a promise. Behind him, Helena's voice carried softly through the night. "Truth gave you your name, my son. Now love will give you your life." He turned to see her smiling, fragile but luminous beneath the moon. Rosa joined her, arm linked with hers, both women watching him as though they'd planted the same seed and were finally seeing it bloom. Gabriel smiled back, and in that moment, the Valmont legacy was rewritten, not in wealth, but in truth. A gust of wind lifted the last camellia petal from the fountain's surface, carrying it upward like a spirit freed. And as it vanished into the dark, the mansion stood quiet and new, no longer haunted, only remembering. Years later, the Valmont estate no longer hosted galas, auctions, or charity dinners dressed in hypocrisy. The chandeliers still glimmered, but their light now belonged to laughter, to children running barefoot through the marble halls that had once echoed only with orders and silence. The estate had become the Gabriel Foundation, a refuge for children without names, without homes, without the luxury of being wanted. Every morning, Helena walked through the gardens with Rosa, her arms steady against the other woman's. Age had softened them both, yet their eyes carried the same fire that once burned through thunder and shame. Camellias bloomed everywhere now, white, pink, even gold, a sea of petals swaying in the wind like memories that had finally learned to dance. Helena paused before the fountain, watching its silver surface ripple beneath the breeze. Her son's name was carved into the stone base, Gabriel Valmont. Where truth begins, love endures. She traced the letters gently, whispering, "You were never lost, only waiting to be found." Rosa squeezed her hand, smiling. "He would be proud of you." Helena shook her head softly. "No, Rosa, we'd be proud of him." And for a long moment, they stood together in the kind of silence that no longer hurt. At the far end of the garden, Gabriel taught a small group of children how to plant camellias. His hair was flecked with gray now, his movements calm, patient, a man who had turned pain into purpose. One of the girls, no older than 7, looked up at him and asked, "Why this flower?" Gabriel smiled, kneeling beside her. "Because it remembers." The child tilted her head. "Remembers what?" He touched a petal gently, his voice low. "That beauty can grow even where the truth was buried." The girl nodded, planting her flower beside the others. As the soil darkened under the water, Gabriel felt something inside him settle, not closure, but peace. Behind him, Arthur's voice carried across the garden. "You've made this place beautiful." Gabriel turned, surprised, then smiled faintly. "We made it honest." Arthur nodded, older now, humility etched into the lines around his eyes. He handed his brother a small wooden box. Inside lay their father's ring, once a symbol of pride, now returned as apology. "Keep it," Arthur said quietly. Maybe it will mean something better in your hands." Gabriel closed the box, and the two men stood beneath the shade of the same tree, not as rivals, but as witnesses of what truth had rebuilt. That evening, the sun melted behind the hills, setting the camellias aglow like embers scattered across the garden. Helena sat on the veranda, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, eyes soft with contentment. Rosa joined her, bringing 2 cups of tea, their steam curling upward into the cooling dusk. From where they sat, they could see Gabriel laughing with the children, his voice mingling with the wind like an echo of forgiveness. Helena leaned back, her breathing slow, her heart unburdened. "Do you remember that night?" she whispered. "The flower, the ribbon?" Rosa nodded, smiling through tears. "It saved us all." Helena reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, the bond of 2 mothers who had carried the same soul in different ways. As the stars began to rise, Gabriel turned from the garden and waved toward them. Helena lifted her hand in return, a tear tracing her smile. The wind carried the scent of camellias across the terrace, soft and sweet, like a benediction. And somewhere within that breeze, the mansion itself seemed to sigh, not with sorrow, but with peace finally earned. For the first time in its long, haunted history, the House of Valmont belonged not to wealth, but to love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so more people can discover that even the smallest act of courage can change the world. Write in the comments, "I believe in the power of courage." Together, let's keep spreading stories that transform lives and prove that hope can rise from the most unexpected voices. Thank you so much for your support.